Hello. As some of you might know, Nintendo is unfortunately shutting down the Wii U servers in April of 2024, which would mean shutting down the now 8-year-old game of Splatoon, which begs the question, how did Splatoon even happen in the first place? Well, it all started in early 2011. So, it's 2011 and Nintendo has just released their brand new console, the Wii U. With its beefed up processor and secondary screen featured on the gamepad controller, this was bound to be a success, right? Yeah, no. In fact, this was one of Nintendo's worst selling consoles of all time. So, the developers at Nintendo said, alright, we need something new. Not a new console, not a new installment in an existing series, but an entirely new IP. The Nintendo developers Nogami, Sato, Sakaguchi, Amano, and Inoue set out to complete this mission. Nogami said in an interview with Iwata, "I gathered them all together and began this project. I said, let's make a new kind of game, without worrying about trying to fit into existing game genres." The shooter genre was dominating the video game market at the time, with titles like Call of Duty and Halo blowing any and all competition out of the water, so it's no surprise that Nintendo went with this route as well. Iwata asked, so what was the idea that became the basis for Splatoon? And it turned out to be, now stay with me, tofu blocks shooting ink in order to capture the enemy's territory. The team had already brainstormed over 70 ideas for the basis, and this was the one they chose. The blocks were designed with little noses to show the player which way they were facing. So not only was it tofu turf war, but the ink being shot was ejected from the nose of the tofu block. It's still crazy to me that we have this after starting with tofu blocks. Now, they did have a reason for this. The TV displayed an overhead view of the maze the characters were located in. The benefit of the black and white tofu was that when one block was in its own ink color, it was invisible, making them impossible to track down on the TV. Even with this seemingly random design, the online 4v4 turf war mechanic that we have today was implemented in this version. After the tofu phase, they plan to add more humanoid-like characters that the player could become more attached to. Because, let's be honest, nobody would be attached to this. There was a dilemma with the human characters, however. Remember how the point of the tofu was to blend in with the ink? With the humanoid characters, you could still tell that there was something there, completely negating the hiding element, so that was out of the picture. It was at this time that the devs decided to add some depth to the maps, allowing the players to ink the walls, but yet again, there was a problem with this. The winner of the game was determined using the top-down view displayed on the TV, so inking the walls provided no benefit to the game. The team debated on whether or not to add this feature, and they even talked about turning the characters back into tofu, but they agreed that that probably wouldn't sell very well. So Nintendo was in a pretty tough spot. The game that they'd already spent over 6 months developing was stalling, with ideas that just didn't seem to stick. Then, they thought, hey, what about Mario? Since in Super Mario Sunshine, Mario was equipped with a water gun that allowed him to shoot water at enemies, and it seemed like a viable option. But the devs really wanted to come up with the character from scratch, rather than borrow a pre-existing one. Then, they had an idea, and it actually seemed to work this time. Rabbits. Iwata asked, why a rabbit? And the team answered with listing its benefits that include, rabbits are already white, so you could easily see the ink on them. The long ears indicate movement, and the direction of the ears would show which direction the player is facing. And overall, rabbits seemed like a much better choice than tofu. When testing this idea out, however, the feedback was mixed. The overall setting and theming was close to that of modern Splatoon, but they still received feedback like, I guess it's fun, I don't see the appeal of the character. And I don't get it. The rabbits weren't the problem, it was the function that the rabbits had. The main problem was a lot of people were wondering why rabbits were shooting ink in the first place, and Nintendo couldn't really give a good explanation for it. So, to say the least, they were struggling. Sakaguchi had the idea to write down what qualities the character had to have, with not only physical appearance, but the actions that the character had to perform as well. One specific quality was a motif where it makes sense to be squirting ink, and he wrote, squid? They had been thinking about using squids as characters for a while, but it wasn't until now that they had come up with the idea of using an entity that could be both humanoid form and ink creature form. And similar to the tofu concept, when the character was in swim form, it would blend in with its own ink. These humanoid characters could perform the shooting actions and would be customizable so the players could grow to love them. Then, when in swim form, you'd be able to swim through your own ink, blending in and hiding from the enemies. Since the characters were able to swim through the ink, the debate about being able to ink the walls was finally settled, and they agreed to make the walls inkable so the character could climb them. Sato said, so we decided that the player could switch between an ink creature and a human, and that solved all our problems there. So, Nintendo finally has some momentum, and it seems that things are going smoothly, but spoiler alert, it won't be for long. The first character design was a squid-like person, however, the team failed to see how squids would be more lovable than rabbits, and some even suggested other sea creatures like sea angels and sea slugs, but they felt that squids were still the better choice. The issue with the squid-like person was that it would be hard to tell if the character was in its human form or its swim form. While the team was trying to design this character, developer Amano suggested that if the character is a squid and a human, why not make the human look like a human and the squid look like a squid? Then, it clicked. The ink creatures were then referred to as squids because they were able to dive into the ink rather than hide in it. Because of this, programmers added camera shakes, sound effects, and even muffled the music when you dove into the ink. At this point, they were on a roll with their good ideas. For example, the Inklings' clothes are heavily based off a street style look because one of the staff members was a big fan of that style. The music team included rock music because they felt that turf wars were seen as cool and rebellious. Now that Nintendo has a lot of momentum moving forward with development, some of the original 70 plus ideas that were brainstormed in the beginning ended up making it into the game now. Nogami said, "And because we came up with all those plans together, even if our ideas didn't end up being used, planning them really helped to strengthen our teamwork. And that was the principle that kept this whole design process moving. If one person was having an issue with the project, the other would have the solution." At the E3 2014 event, Splatoon was unveiled to the public, however, only about 10% of the game was completed at the time. There was only one stage, that being Urgent Underpass, and one weapon, that being the Splatter Shot. The hardest part for Nintendo was turning this project into a product that would keep players coming back for more. They really worked hard on fine-tuning the weapons and stages to allow for multiple styles of gameplay. If anything was unbalanced, they went right to work on a cycle of tuning and testing. After they had finished the multiplayer aspect, they worked on a single-player campaign, Octo Valley. The single-player campaign was designed for players who wanted to familiarize themselves with the game mechanics before jumping into online matches. And even on top of all this, they added a local multiplayer mode called the Battle Dojo. This allowed 2 players to 1v1 on the same console, given you had the correct hardware. The Battle Dojo was something that I personally really enjoyed, although I felt like a lot of people had mixed feelings about it. A few weeks before the release of Splatoon, Nintendo released a global test fire for the game. For a limited time, the players would get to experience the world of Splatoon. For any of you that might have played the Splatoon 2 or Splatoon 3 test fire, it was very similar to that. So, on May 29th, 2015, the game was released worldwide for players to purchase. And it was a huge success. On launch, the game featured Turf War, or regular battle as they called it, and Ranked Battle, which only featured Splat Zones at the time because the other 2 game modes were planned to release in a later update. Nintendo kept the game fresh by consistently adding new content every couple of weeks. Maybe a certain game should be taking notes from that. Yes, I'm looking at you, Splatoon 3. Probably the most notable of these updates was the one on August 5th, 2015. In this update, Nintendo added a whole bunch of new gear, new weapons, and best of all, private and squad battles were introduced. And even after this, Nintendo continued to add more modes, weapons, and gear to keep the players coming back to the game. Again, Splatoon 3, you should be taking notes here. So, the rest is history. Since that day, we've received 2 new installments in the Splatoon series, and Splatoon itself has become one of Nintendo's top-selling IPs. Given I've committed over half my life to this game, I, along with a lot of other people, of course are going to be sad to see it go. A little bit after the release, developers Amano and Sato were playing Splatoon when they both said, "We made a really fun game, didn't we?" And yes, you guys did. Thank you for that. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video, hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.